Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to format your figure with your means and standard deviations plotted into the APA style and some of the best practices that we would typically use or perform with any kind of scientific figure. So you don't have to do these in any particular order, but I'm just going to go through them one by one of the different formatting aspects that we need to take care of. So firstly, we're going to delete some things from the figure. What we don't need, let me just zoom into this a bit more so you can see it more clearly. What we don't need is a chart title. What we do have is a figure caption, which we'll address later, but a chart title is not needed. So you can click on that and you can press the delete key, or you can right click and then select delete. What we also don't need is these horizontal grid lines on the figure. That is not part of the APA style, so we can delete those. So just click on any of these grey lines and it will highlight them, and then we can right click and delete that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the formatting of some things, and what we want to do is adjust the formatting of each axis first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the axes. If you ever want to format an individual element of the graph, what you typically have to do is click on it first, and then that will allow you to change all the options with it. So if I click on that and come to format at the top here, it's going to give me a bunch of different options as to what I can do here. If I click format selection, it's also going to open that window back up that we can use to make a lot more additional changes to the formatting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click this black line here, and that's going to create this y-axis line. I'm going to click on the x-axis and I'm going to do the same there. So we have this nice line here that runs along the axes. I then want to create tick marks for the axes. So to do that, I'm going to come across to my formatting box and go to axes options. Then I'm going to go to tick marks, and then I want the major type to be outside. That's essentially just going to put a tick mark in between or at the axes data points. So I'm going to do that for both the x and y axes here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to ensure that the text on the axes are suitable. So I'm going to double check that they're black, and I'm going to make the text size 11. That's typically the size that we would go for. The font that you choose is kind of up to you, but as long as the font is one of these more plain fonts, it's not something like one of these more fancy fonts. It's got to be nice and clear and easy to read. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this grey border from the figure. We don't want this grey border. We just want it to be a clear, transparent border. So I'm going to go to Format, and I'm going to go to Shape Fill once I've clicked on the graph, and I'm going to click No Fill. So you can have it as no fill here, or you can fill it as white, but what we don't want is the shape outline. Or we can change the shape outline to white. Either or works fine as long as there's no visible border along our figure. So that's that sorted. The next thing we need to do is just add axes labels now. So to do that, what we're going to do is click on our figure. We're going to come back to the add chart element part. And then we're going to come down to axes titles, and we're just going to click that. Now we're going to start with creating our y-axis title. So we just need to label this as to what the axis reflects. So in our case, the axis reflected body mass. And then we also importantly want to put the unit of measurement in there. So this was recorded in kilograms. I'm going to make sure that that's black text, and I'm going to make sure that it's 11-point font to keep it consistent with all the other text. For the x-axis, this may not always be necessary, but I'm just going to write time point so it clearly shows that the x-axis is showing the time point. Again, I'm going to make that black text and 11 size. You can click and drag and move it around a bit if you want to change the formatting, but that is appropriate how it is. The next thing we're going to want to do is to change the range of this y-axis. You can see it currently goes from 0 to 140 kilograms. Now, the issue is that it keeps the data in this one small segment of the graph. And what we really want is the data to fill the entire graph so we can more clearly see the differences and the patterns in the data. So to do that, just click on your y-axis, and in your window here on the side, we're going to go to this symbol again. We're going to axes options. And now what we're going to do is we're going to change the axes minimum bound, so what's the lowest number on the axes, and the maximum bound, what's the highest number of the axes. An okay rule of thumb to go for is to make the data cover the majority of the graph. So we can see that if I change that to 70, for example, it's going to keep the data largely within the graph, and means that we can see it more zoomed in now. We can see what's going on more clearly. So that's okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to format the individual series and then mark them on my figure. So to firstly mark which series is which, in other words, which line is the placebo group and which is the Ozempic group, I'm going to go to the plus button again and I'm going to click Legend. And you can see that's going to add this little part in, which tells me which line colour is placebo and which is Ozempic. What I like to do is to click on the figure and then drag it all the way to the end of the box like that. And then what I want to do is move this legend box down into an area where I've got lots of white space. If you leave it on the right hand side by default, that's okay. It just might mean that your figure becomes a bit more squashed, and that can make it a little bit more difficult to interpret. Just want to ensure with this new legend that I've created that it keeps consistent with the rest of the text in the figure. So again, making it black text and size 11 and the same font. Now, to format each individual series, if I click on a series, we can see that it opens a bunch of formatting options. We want to go to this paint bucket symbol, and here is where we can change the lines or we can change the markers. I'm going to firstly change the line for each series, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make each line the colour black and much thinner. So I'm going to change the colour of the line, and I'm going to change the width to be much thinner. I'm going to have it as half a point thickness. You can still see the line clearly, but again, it just helps reduce the amount of overlap and clutter on the figure. I'm going to repeat the process by clicking on the other series. I'm going to change that to black from orange, and again, that down to half a point. Now I'm going to change the marker. So I'm just going to expand all of these options out so I can start playing around with them. I'm going to make the marker size slightly bigger. I like to go with size 6. I'm going to keep it the same shape, but you could change the shape of it if you really wanted to. And then I'm going to change the colour of the Ozempic group to be black. I'm going to do that for both the border of the marker and the actual marker colour itself. I'm going to make that marker border 0.5, the same width as my line. And these start to matter less in terms of the individual formatting, so you don't have to follow it exactly like I can, but this is the kind of design that you would want to strive for. So I'll then click on my placebo group, and I'm going to make that colour white with a black border. So go to marker, marker options, again keeping it consistent by keeping the marker size as 6. Then I'm going to change the colour of the marker to white, and then going to make the border colour of the marker black at 0.5 points. And what you can see now is that's automatically updated the legend and has made those two individual series look a lot more clear now. You can see by making things thinner, it's allowed for more of the differences to be revealed in the figure and just has made it a lot more clean and clear to interpret as a reader. Finally, let's say we had some significant differences with our data. We did statistical analysis on it. What we could do is we could denote those statistical analyses for each individual level between the groups. So to do that, we just put a symbol. So I'm going to go to Insert and Text Box. I've just created a text box here. To denote statistical significance, we would typically do a symbol like a star. I'm going to make that bold, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to shrink the box down to fit the size of the star. What I don't want is the border on that shape, so I'm going to go to No Outline. And now you can see a star. Let's say, for example, I had a significant difference between 9 months of the placebo and Ozempic group and 12 months of the placebo and Ozempic group. So I've just copied and pasted that star and moved those like that. So now you can see that there's a significant difference there. For the purpose of the assignment, you don't have to do this. I'm more worried about you just showing the differences or plotting the data itself. You don't need to worry about doing the statistical analysis or presenting the stars on it like this, but you can if you want to. It won't change your grade. So that's it. Once we've done all that, we've basically formatted our figure as to what it should look like.